I think the NEP's aim is to build citizens for an equitable, inclusive, and plural society with increasing gross enrollment ratio. I think up to 2030, we are aspiring for 50%. Equity and inclusion is at the heart of the policy. Equity basically ensures availability of wide range of educational opportunities, inclusive curriculum and pedagogy, avoidance of any kind of ethnic and racial segregation and isolation. And inclusion is basically has a connotation of avoidance of exclusion of any sort and learning of higher human values, such as gender equality, human rights, tolerance, gender sensitization, and reducing the dropout rate among the girls is of the utmost most importance to this policy. So, however, there is an increasing emphasis on commercialization and privatization of education sector. But I have to add that despite all the efforts in the past decades and significant improvements in the crucial areas, education system in the country continues to grapple with challenges of inequity and exclusion, especially for the population who are residing in the remote rural areas, vulnerable and marginal groups. This holds true for both the primary as well as the higher education opportunities. And the NEP professes to recognize the unmet educational needs of the populations living in the geographically difficult regions, socioeconomic disadvantaged groups, people having disabilities, and certain gender identities too. And it seeks to achieve this through targeted scholarships, conditional cash transfers, and other means. But needless to add, despite such measures in the past, certain tribes and disadvantaged groups have continued to suffer from multiple and structural barriers and discriminations. And I think these structural barriers have to be addressed, which are the core issues of inclusivity, and foster a discourse on issues of discrimination, which the individuals are facing, especially the disadvantaged groups and classes. However, the proposal for special educational zones in regions with significant populations of socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, this stands out when we go through the NEP. But naturally, it remains to be seen whether resource allocations as well as the dovetailing of programs and schematic outlays will happen in a sufficiently satisfactory manner to transform such regions. This remains to be seen. Also, the addressing the unique challenges of groups like Dalits, Adivasis, these are questions that require a lot of deliberations. So the pathways and the roadmap of the NEP 2020 thus requires a lot of thinking and a lot of deliberations. So I think in that context, having the two eminent scholars and policy makers today in today's seminar is a very welcome I think development which we have done on behalf of Sardar Patel. So I would really like to welcome, although the resumes are very extensive and it will take a lot of time, but I would like to definitely highlight some.
Is it audible?
Yes.
It seems to be some issue.
Yeah, now it's audible.
Some technical issues there.
Yes, you are audible. Yes.
I am audible. Yeah. But where is the ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yes, you are audible, but The video is, yeah, there she is now, I can see her.
Niti ma'am, please unmute yourself.
I think maybe she has to rejoin, is it? She's not.
She's not in participant list actually.
Yeah, I think maybe she has to rejoin Hamsaben.
She has joined. She has rejoined. Yeah,
Okay.
she's there.
Sorry, I was facing some problems with the internet in my room. So yeah, and so we have with us Professor Mona Khare, who's the key speaker of today's webinar. Professor Khare is the head of Educational Finance Center for Policy Research in Higher Education in the NIPA, New Delhi. She is a member of the 15th Finance Commission for Education Sector Fund Estimation, Government of India. She's a technical expert for a number of committees, prominently the Child Budget Committee, Gender Budgeting in the Government of Karnataka, to name a few. She's consultant and expert with various international forums. She's member of the Commonwealth Education Ministers Drafting Committee of Post-Secondary Forum for SGDs. She's a member of the Declaration of Research between India and Germany. She is an invited speaker and policy analyst across the world in a number of institutions. She has a number of, in fact, she has been the Young Economist Awardee twice of the Indian Economic Association as well as Government of Madhya Pradesh. She has a number of books and reports and journal articles to her credit. Her areas of research include employability skills of educated youth, financing of education, educational internationalization, regional and spatial disparities in educational development. So these are the prominent areas where ma'am has been working on. She is she's associated with renowned publishers, international publishers, as well as several Indian journals too. And she holds advisory positions in a number of universities in India and abroad. So I must add that Professor Khare is a very distinguished academician in this area of education. We are very delighted to have you, ma'am. I'm sure that your lecture is going to be very illuminating. We are very thankful that Professor Mohd Muzammil has agreed to chair this session. Professor Muzammil is the former Vice Chancellor of B.R. Ambedkar University as well as MJP Rohilkhand University in Bareilly. Professor Muzammil is
Ma'am, you are muted. Niti ma'am, please unmute yourself.
he is an advisor and a visitor. I have unmuted.
You are on mute.
No, I'm not. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
We can hear you.
So Professor Muzammil is a speaker, has been a past speaker in several universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, Tehran, Colombo, Bangladesh. He is advising the government and non-government organizations and is sitting on the governing board of many institutions. He's a resource person for training of vice chancellors and senior academics. He's a chairman of the peer team of NAC Bangalore, Government of India. He's a resource person in several refresher courses and orientation programs, which are dealing with the capacity building in the universities. Most notably, Professor Muzammil has published several books and monographs, chiefly Financing of Education, Agricultural Economics, Human Development, co-authored Political Economy of Education in UP. He has been associated with a number of international research projects funded by the World Bank, UNDP, DFID, NIPA, UGC, NUS, Singapore. And I think the list goes on and on. So rather than dwelling on the achievements of both the very distinguished scholars, I think I would now ask Professor Muzammil to chair the session and deem it, how he deems it best to proceed with the webinar. So, sir, would you like to make your
Thank
remarks,
you.
or first would you
Thank
let
you very
Professor
much.
Khare to
Thank
make a
you.
presentation and then
Thank
have
you.
your...
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to join this special talk on equity and inclusive education in India in the light of the National Education Policy 2020. And we have a very eminent speaker today on this topic, and Professor Niti Mehta, you have very rightly mentioned in the very beginning what are the issues which have taken our attention on this issue. And we have a very befitting scholar of international repute on this topic, equity and inclusion in higher education particularly. And the researchers that have gone there in the NEPA and what she herself has done in her own capacity, I think will surely be throwing light on different dimensions which have been less researched and which are less known, but which are very significant when we discuss the issues of equity and inclusion. Because this national policy on education emphasizes that this issue continues from school education to higher education. It should not be viewed only at a particular level of education. So this is very important that this issue starts from primary level to secondary level and goes up to higher level, even on a specialized level of higher education, and then ultimately also results into the outcome of education. And that is why the government has recommended in this policy, has opined in this policy that there will be several actions which will be taken up by the government, and the government also hopes that there will be several actions which will be taken up by the higher education institutions concerned. So I think this is right time now to discuss various issues in detail, and I'm very happy to chair this eminent program of Sardar Patel Institute of Social and Economic Research, or Ahmedabad. And thank you very much, Professor Niti Mehta, Director of the Institute, for giving me this opportunity. And my grateful thanks to Professor Hansa Jain, convener of this program, to invite me on this occasion. Thank you very much. And I think Professor Hansa Jain, if this suits the program, we should request Professor Mona Khare to begin her talk on this important theme, equity and inclusion in education in the light of national education policy. Thank you, Professor Mona Khare.
Thank you very much, sir. And it is certainly an honor to be speaking on this very issue in front of you. So I'm very glad and extremely thankful to the Sardar Patel Institute, and more in particular to Professor Niti Mehta and also Dr. Hansa Jain, who have given me this opportunity to be sharing my views and some of our own findings from various research, and certain things, as you very rightly said, what are the kind of challenges and gaps that exist, and how we can particularly take forward the very spirit of the new education policy 2020 and put it into practice. So with that thanks note, do I have the permission to start my presentation? I will just share it and then we can begin.
Sure. In whatever way you are comfortable, you can share the screen, or you can explain whatever you like, please. Yeah.
Ma'am, you can share the presentation.
Yeah, I'm just doing.
Yeah. Yes, it is visible.
Okay, great. So as the very topic said, that we would be talking on equity and inclusion in higher education, but more particularly, I will be focusing on how the new education policy is trying to take forward from wherever we stand today. So that is what made me kind of entitle my talk of today as strategic ways to improve equity. and inclusion in higher education. So I thought maybe we could start with taking a very, very quick look on the history of various ways and means in which this very issue has been tackled in our country, but then quickly coming to the new education policy and why and how we can call it to be a unique one, a forward-looking one, and also a comprehensive one. But then bringing it down to why, despite so many ways in which we have been trying to address the issue of inclusion and equity, as was very, very rightly put by in the opening remarks by the director, why the need and what are those dimensions of inclusion in higher education which are still challenging the whole whole ethos of the higher education system and the way in which it should have been given a distributive angle. I will also then maybe throw light on what are the existing ways and means, but then more importantly on what are the gaps that exist there and how the new education policy is trying to expand this very efforts of bringing in greater inclusion into the higher education system. So I don't think there is any kind of a debate on the role that higher education is playing in the economic progress, in the national progress, and also in the individual's upward mobility, more particularly in today's knowledge economy and knowledge society. But gone are the days when we were only looking at education for increased growth or maybe greater competitiveness, or maybe greater individual capabilities in the global labor market. Today, we are talking of growth with greater distributive justice. And it is here where we are not just looking at education per se, but education with equity and excellence. And if you look at it, we have all been aware of the very fact that this kind of a distributive justice has evaded a reasonably high growth, economic growth that India has experienced in the post-liberalization era, more particularly. Instead of the gaps and chasm being closed, it has been widening, it has been deepening, which has been a major cause of our worry. And although, as Professor Mehta had also mentioned, although the enrollments have been rising, although more and more students are coming into the education fold, yet the issue of equity and also excellence has been troubling us for long. And that was the reason as to why state interventions have also been there from a very, very long time. In fact, we have one of the longest histories of affirmative action by the state for all kinds of stigmas that have been attached, the kind of discrimination that has been meted out to certain category or certain groups of people in the society, and how in the very process of economic growth, these people could not be taken into the fold and continued to remain marginalized, continued to remain outside the fold of the economic growth. So the most broad, or maybe the oldest one has been, of course, which is based on caste and ethnicity. That is the policy of reservation, which existed even during the British time. So right even before the independence, which started with reservation for non-Brahmins, both in jobs as well as in education, in the princely state of Mysore as well as Madras. It was as early as in 1935 that the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes were given reservations in both jobs as well as in education. And since then, the reservations for these two groups of people have continued uninterrupted. Of course, we have had times when there have Sorry for the interruption. There was a call. So there have been times when people have questioned whether this should be continued. There has been high degree of resentment also. There have been court cases, etc., more particularly in the 80s and 90s. But whatever it be, we continued with this kind of a positive discrimination that we often call it as. And in fact, it was in 2007 that it was further extended to another group of disadvantaged communities, the OBCs, the other backward classes, and further in 2019 to the economically weaker sections. So that today, if we look at it, although the constitution did say that the reservation shouldn't exceed 50%, but today we stand to be not just the oldest, but also one of the largest systems in the world history for giving reservations to certain disadvantaged groups and communities. And today it stands at 59.5% for the central institutions. And it varies across states because, as you know, the states have their own um, um, own norms and rules to include or maybe exclude certain communities from their reservation fold. So if we look at the kind of state interventions that have been introduced in the country over a period of time, I can certainly put it within the United Nations framework of SDPP, which also relates to the child rights. And this SDPP, which means survival, development, protection, and participation. So, when we are talking about all kinds of ways and means which have been adopted, this SDPP then refers to ways to not just improve access and participation in higher education for these communities, but more importantly, how we can see that they continue in the systems. So completion of the entire education cycle, ensuring their survival. When we talk about development, today we are talking more in terms of the outcomes and outputs rather than the input oriented concerns about the education sector. So development then talks about looking into improved learning, academic outcomes, student success, employability, job placements, etc., etc. And another fourth very important dimension which was added to this whole idea of providing protection to these communities wherever they are present, the protection which may be provided to them in both terms, in terms of physical support, in terms of any kind of physical abuse or any kind of mental abuse that they go through. So these are the four areas which have been crucial when we are talking about improving equity and inclusion in the higher education sectors. And as I said, although we started with reservation as to be one of the very important tool to achieve this, which was very soon followed by financial support of various natures, but then infrastructural support and also personal support. So these are the four categories of the ways and means. We will discuss about them in greater detail in the coming slides, but just to introduce. Coming to the new education policy 2020, let me very quickly just give an overview, talking more about the elements which will relate to our area of discussion today. And you must have heard people saying that the new education policy is unique, it is forward looking, it is very comprehensive, and all of that. So, why is it that everyone is so excited? It is not just because it has been long awaited. We have waited for 35 long years for the new policy to come, and lot has changed in these 35 years. But more so, the policy is more holistic. Uh, it aims to it aims at rather multifaceted development of students. For the first time, we are talking about integrating knowledge and skills development at the higher education level. So far, they have been existing in silos where skill development has been a greater focus at the secondary schooling level and lesser at the higher education level, where knowledge creation was considered to be more important. But for the first time, we are kind of talking about building a continuum of this kind of an integration between knowledge and skill development and bringing it to the higher education level. I would also try to reiterate that the new education policy also draws from the UNDP's SDPP framework of survival, development, protection, and participation. And also, very importantly, it reflects the global education development agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. If we would like to quote from the SDG 4 that was adopted by India also in 2015, it very clearly and categorically says to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. So, which is something that the four very important words in this sentence. Ensure inclusive and equitable is fine, but ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. So it is for the first time that we are now talking about more about quality, and we are not just talking about bringing in people into the system. The second very important word in this statement is promote lifelong learning opportunities. We all have to agree to the fact that the pace at which the world is changing today is unprecedented. Be it in terms of production technologies, be it in terms of use of technology in various spheres of our life. But until and unless we prepare ourselves to be learning all through the life, we won't be able to keep pace with anything. So these two words in this sentence, quality education for all and lifelong learning opportunities, are very important for us to remember when we are talking about equity and inclusion of the people. Also, I would like to emphasize that the new education policy stands on four pillars, which start with E. So we are talking about enrollments, equity, excellence, and also employability. So far, which was it was only in the 12th five-year plan that for the first time the word employability was used. I may also like to call this policy a little futuristic because we are moving away from access to quality and learning, but also because we are trying to integrate to teaching skills, research, and innovation. For the first time, the policy has dedicated a lot of space to research and innovation, and it would be great to see how we can make this very elite area of higher education more inclusive and equity based. And lastly, why futuristic? Why I have like to put this internationalization at home over here? Because you would all agree that globalization is the is the is the talk of the day, and it is going to stay. It is going to stay. The pandemic has already shown us how the entire international community has to come together to fight against all kinds of turmoils and challenges which may be thrown open to us suddenly or maybe in a planned fashion. So therefore, how so far we have been focusing more on internationalization abroad, wherein our students were going abroad for studies more than trying to focus on not just bringing them into the country, like bringing foreign students into the country, internationalization at home, but also how our curricula, our campuses could become more internationalized. But however, since this is not the area of discussion today, I will not be dwelling on it in greater detail, but just wanted to touch upon it as to how to make this very area of international education also extremely inclusive and equity based is going to be a challenge in coming years. But very, very important uh, fact that I would like to bring to light to this very learned audience today is how the new education policy has broadened the definition of diversity. In this very one word that has been coined, the SEDGs, the socio-economically deprived groups, which may be classified on the basis of gender, that includes, of course, females, but also the transgender, which were not very uh, vocally included so far. Socio-cultural, those always existed, SC, STs, OBCs, and minorities. Geographical, we are all aware of, be it between rural and urban areas, between small towns, metropolitan cities, between difficult to reach regions, to which Professor Mehta had already mentioned in her opening remarks. For the first time, there is a greater emphasis on students with special needs. And we are not just talking about those who are in need of such help physically, but also those who require it because of their learning disabilities of a mental order. To this entire group of deprived communities, we have also added another section of people like the migrant communities, the low-income households, children from vulnerable situations, victims of child trafficking, or maybe uh, children, street children, beggars, etc., orphans, all of those. First time, the policy is also talking about gifted and children with special talents. We have, in a way, always ignored this very area of individual talents in the country, and maybe have always, as we have always been criticized for rote learning to be our on just examination education system, giving lesser importance to the talents uh, and the any kind of be it in art and culture and sports, any kind of talents which have not received so much of support either at the school level and lesser so at the higher education level. So these are the four fundamental principles that are enshrined in the NEP 2020. Although there are a couple of more, but I thought of just bringing these four over here today because these in some way or the other are going to directly reflect upon equity and inclusion. So if you can look at the very first fundamental principle that says recognizing, identifying, and fostering the unique capabilities of each student and promote each student's development in both academic and non-academic spheres. So here for the first time, we are at least trying to accept that each student has some unique capabilities and therefore we need to foster it. The second principle on which the new education policy is based is multidisciplinarity and skill-based education. We have all talked a lot about it, so I am not going to give much time to discuss this particular point. Extensive use of technology, what all we have learned in this pandemic, how suddenly we were forced to move from face to face to the online mode, all kinds of challenges which were faced by even the elite groups of students, but the way, the kind of technology gap that emerged during this pandemic could have never uh, been realized or researched upon in earlier times. Yeah, so yes, how very effectively we can make use of technology to be able to solve this issue of exclusion and diversity and disparities. And last very important point, which draws from the kind of structural reasons behind the continuation of this kind of a discrimination to which Professor Mehta referred in our opening remark, is the respect for diversity and local context. Now, how to develop this respect for diversity is something which is going to be extremely challenging, but the education policy for the first time is emphasizing upon bringing in language, local art and craft, etc., as compulsory elements of learning, both in the school education as well as in the higher education. And this becomes very important, that a kind of continuum is maintained, something to which Professor Muzammil in a very short time also referred, that it is very important to bring a continuum from school levels to the higher education level. So bringing it down to this just para 14.4 in our policy that states ensuring equitable access to quality education to all students with a special emphasis on SEDGs. So SEDGs are going to be our major area of discussion today. Coming to the need and dimensions of this whole issue of equity and inclusion in higher education, we as Indians often take pride of our own diversities. We call ourselves, we take pride in calling ourselves to be a land of diverse culture. Unfortunately, this diverse culture, instead of bringing us glory, has been fostering disparities, and this is something which has existed for a very long time in the country, and we have not been able to make any great inroads in breaking this. Uh, Now, why it has become all the very more important today is, as we all know, that the enrollments in higher education sector are growing at a very fast pace. And today we have reached a stage where we are saying that higher education is massifying itself. So, in a massifying system of higher education, certainly people from different backgrounds are coming in increasing numbers onto the campus. And today we have an extremely diversified student population. And although we are still very far away from reaching the gross enrollment rates of advanced nations, but even then, the kind of increase in the enrollments that have taken place, more particularly in the past 2 decades, has been something that has cautioned us towards how to be able to manage this kind of a diverse pool of students who are coming onto the campuses, because they come here with identity crisis, identity taboos of coming from lower social strata or low income groups, but also which get reflected in their learning needs crisis. And I don't think I need to elaborate much on these things, because we as academicians have not just read a lot about it, but also we have experienced as teachers the kind of past baggages that many of the students from these communities who enter formal schooling systems bring with them, the past baggages of various kinds of disadvantages, and the influence of any kind of social and cultural capital which is lacking in them, many of them being first generation learners, the kind of language barriers that they may face because they have either studied in the school levels in regional languages, or maybe Hindi, and they are not able to cope up with the English, a language which is very highly recommended, if not used for teaching in higher education, but at least recommended so that they are able to access good literature and books, journals, etc., which are available more in English language. Also, these baggages prevent them from or uh, a very important factor that hinder their capabilities to seek admissions in high prestige colleges in high value subjects like engineering, or colleges like IITs, IIMs, or even the best of universities in the country. So the and it's not just the factors which inhibit their capabilities to enter these campuses, but even after entering a particular college campus, there are a number of other factors which lead to a continuity crisis. So which I like to call as continuity crisis, because they find themselves to not be fitting into that culture and climate and environment of the campus of elite institutions, which then leads to dropouts, or maybe their poor learning, poor transitions, failures of all sorts, their hesitation in participating in various activities on campus, several such things. Um, but I would also like to specifically highlight over here something which has happened in the recent pandemic, how the investment choices of the families, or how the trouble situations in the families, uh, unforeseen personal crisis sometimes uh, prevent them, or maybe block their progress and their continuity in the higher education sector. Sometimes they have to drop their studies in between to earn livelihood for themselves and their families. Uh, we have seen how the students have struggled more because of any kind of external factors, be it natural calamities, be it pandemic, depression, riots, violence. So we are talking about all these things, and also experiencing, seeing all these things happen. So all kinds of uh, um, disparities and all kinds of discrimination is not just explicit, which is very much visible to all of us, but uh, many more aspects which are hidden but have very important implications for future. Uh, that is, the implicit disparities also need to be tackled. And one thing that we need to learn is, if we feel that this is going to be self corrective, we are extremely misguided about it, because there are several studies which have proven that education in itself, instead of helping the people who are coming from these kind of backgrounds, so it is kind of uh, not being progressive, but it is becoming regressive for them. So it is producing, schooling is reproducing hierarchies rather than correcting them. So it is not going to be self-corrective, and therefore it becomes all the more important as to how and why we need to make efforts if we look at the various forms and dimensions of inclusion and disparities that exist in the higher education sector, yes, we talk about intergroup disparities. We can talk about interregional, interpersonal, or intersectoral, because as we see, there are certain um, like maybe the general education system You may find more representation of students from these backgrounds, but in technical and professional education, there is lesser representation. But what various studies have shown is the persistence of the social group disparities and the increase in the regional disparities and income inequalities in the higher education sector in India, which is something which is extremely worrisome. I will very quickly show to you some of the facts which are emerging from the existing data of current times. So talking about the intergroup disparities, the first and foremost that is often discussed is the gender disparities. And we are all very happy to say that today more and more women are coming into the higher education system. And for the first time, the number of girls in the system is more than the number of boys today. And for the first time, the gender parity index is more than 1 for all India as a whole. But is that enough? Is what I would like to question. Because even though there are more girls in the system today, we still see an adverse graduate population ratio in the country, which is a result of the long existing bias. These are some of the figures that I have mentioned over here. I will not detail them out, but you can just take a look. So if you look at this, the adverse graduate population ratio, it ranges from being as high as 52% in the state of Bihar. We also have an adverse female higher education participation ratio in certain subjects. And unfortunately, those subjects which are more biased towards male participation are high value and job oriented disciplines, which certainly then hamper women's progression into the world of work. What is even more distressing is the fact that the gender parity index, which is which is like a single most value that reflects upon the reduction in the male female gap in enrollments in higher education, is adverse in many of the states. So out of a total of 16 major states in the country, the GPI is favorable for women only in 6 of them. And unfortunately, if you look at this diagram, between 2011 to 2015, and then between 2015 to 2019, you still find the GPI to be uh, going downwards. Like the GPI is increasing in the state of Bihar, which was the worst state anyways. So the gender parity index, instead of improving, has worsened in Bihar. Similarly, in another state as Odisha, which is again one of the developing states of the country, not only the GPI is negative in both the decades, but it has fallen. And these are some of the things that brings us to thinking and rethinking in terms that any kind of a blanket policy at the national level is not going to help us. And it is very important that we need to disaggregate and go down to the regional and sub-regional levels, state, and in fact, even within the districts, sub-national, sub-regional levels, in order to identify the important core areas where we need to hit hard. So as I said, that the enrollments may be increasing, and not just the regional, but the group adversities are also extremely high. Uh, so share of female students being lowest in institutions of national importance. And this is something which I'm bringing from the latest All India Survey of Higher Education 2019, followed by state private open universities. Another important thing which I would like to highlight over here is why I brought this over here. Because when we are talking about the institutions of national importance, if you look into the list of which are these institutions, you will agree with me that most of these institutions belong to the technical and professional, elite technical and professional, top ranking technical and professional institutions of the country. And it is here that the share of female students is the lowest. Again, we know that this entire growth in the enrollments in higher education sector is a function of privatization of higher education. As more and more private colleges have opened in the past 2 decades, so many more private universities that have come up in the, and here again we find that the share of the female students is lowest in the private universities and also open universities and deemed universities. Just to highlight two more very important dimensions, how then these kind of imbalances which exist in terms of their access result or they get carried forward into the places of work. Now, if you look at this particular figure, which is showing the unemployment rate of the higher education graduates in the country, you will realize that it is not just that the unemployment rate of women higher education graduates much higher than that of the male, but over the years this has been increasing. This is also something which is a major cause of worry. How these existing participation and access disparities and then get carried forward into the actual world of work and living. Also, if you look at some of the data, as again 69% of male main graduate workers, there are only 27 female main graduate workers. Now you would know that if the proportion of the main workers for females is so low, then obviously they are going to be in the other categories of workers, which certainly are characterized by low quality employment, poor wages, difficult work conditions, etc., etc. Uh, Another important dimension that I would like to bring to the notice of this August gathering is not only do we find skewed ratios of male to female students in high value subjects like engineering, where this ratio is 1.96. Unfortunately, even when these students like engineers, when they enter into the world of work, we find that female are less employed in the IT industry. And in one of our surveys, in one of our studies on graduate employment and employability in India, we were very much surprised to learn from the horse's mouth themselves. So, like senior HR executives, when they said uh, that we don't discriminate between men and women, but yes, we are reluctant in offering jobs to women because we think that field work is little difficult for them, this that, so we keep certain kind of jobs for women, but a majority of the jobs we prefer men. uh, we have also found in our survey that women get to prone to get lesser promotions, lower salaries, lesser professional recognition, etc., etc. Another very important dimension of this is underrepresentation of women in senior positions, which is very, very much evident even in our own higher education system. I will not take too much time on this. The two bar diagrams over here themselves very clearly show how in the past 5 years also the ratio of female faculty at the assistant professor level is uh, better. I wouldn't say that still it is at par, because these are the number of female faculty per 100 male, but at least it is better as compared to uh, professors levels, which is the worst over here. So why is it so? Is it because women faculty are less capable of getting promoted to senior positions, or is it any other kind of implicit reasons for this disparity that we observe? Same happens, whatever we have talked in greater detail regarding the gender disparities happens with social group disparities also. So if you look at all kinds of GERs, etc., you will find that they are much lesser. Their representation and by way of enrollment in technical education is much lesser. Interstate disparities, these are some data. I will not take much time to dwell on it. Maybe you can look at it later. But interstate disparities are becoming more and more, as is evident from widening GER gaps between the states. I have not even gone down to the district level, and I'm sure this is going to be even wider. Uh, in terms of college densities, where we have the number of colleges per lakh eligible population in the higher education is as low as 7 in Bihar to 59 in Karnataka. And you can look at the gap between this. The college size, which becomes also very, very important, because the kind of quality education that we are aiming at, only 16.3% colleges in India have less than 100 enrollment, or not even 100 students studying here. And today, when we are talking about multidisciplinary large universities and large higher education institutions with more than 3,000 students, it is only 4% of such colleges that exist in the country. So this again is going to be a great challenge. And as we are now talking about becoming multidisciplinary large institutions of more than 3,000 people studying on the same campus, how are we going to make these campuses inclusive is again going to be a very, very big challenge. Rural urban disparities, of course, I don't think that I need to describe this much. Uh, what is even more distressing is to see the special group disparities. And within the special groups, of course, we look at students with physical disabilities, because we already have reservation to the order of 5% in higher education institutions. And unfortunately, even even after this, the actual figures do not even reach 1% of such students in the higher education sector. So how are we going to increase their representation to at least 5% of the reserved seats in higher education institutions? And here too, you will observe within this very group, you will observe that men outnumber women, and their numbers from the socially disadvantaged communities is much lesser. And this is here, this whole picture of doubly disadvantaged also come in. So gender combined with other social or maybe other factors, doubly, triply disadvantaged. Women, a woman from a socially disadvantaged community, who may be widowed, who may be divorced, and possibly they have still not found any kind of a support system in the higher education system. So, so these are certain groups which are still missing to be located and to be brought into the fold of education and higher education per se. Now, uh, the kind of ways and means which are existing today, of course, reservations and relaxations of all sorts. We all know about the various quotas that exist both in government and the private aided institutions. In fact, we are now also insisting upon the private institutions to adhere to these reservation norms. We are also aware of the relaxations which are given to students in terms of the eligibility criteria for admissions in various institutions, the qualifying marks, etc., etc. Financial supports in various ways, scholarships, fellowships, fee exemptions, be it admission fees, tuition fee, hostel fee, etc., etc. Subsidies of various nature, a subsidized fee, or maybe books, library facility, etc., etc. Even the education loans at lower interest rates, and also very few institutions are offering earn while learn facility to these students. Infrastructure support, of course, we have special hostels for this category of students, or maybe certain seats are reserved in the general hostels for them, but we are still lacking on special equipments, etc., trained personnel and all. In terms of protection and personal support, there are a variety of cells and committees which are already in place, whether it be the anti-ragging, the harassment, this, that, all those kinds of committees that exist. We also talk about career advancement and uh, what is that the UGC coaching scheme, etc., which is existing for giving training to these students, coaching rather to these students for national level examinations, etc. All these things are already existing, but uh, their implementation is an issue because of lack of trained people and lack of adequate infrastructure also is one of the reasons. I will show you. Where do the problems exist? Where do the problems exist in terms of all these four categories? Reservations and relaxations. This has always been a gray area, like all the time, a lot of debates, controversies in terms of continuity. There's a lot of resentment that exists in the society per se, and it is the students from this community who feel humiliated at times, and they don't even want to own it, they don't even want to get it disclosed, because they may face some kind of identified harassment, etc. So reservations and relaxations, these are the kind of issues that are existing, which instead of giving any kind of a confidence in the students of this community, are pushing them into silos and in becoming more complex and introvert. And how we can tackle this is also a very challenging area. As far as the financial support through various means is concerned, certainly the issue of adequacy, whether it is adequate, the rate at which the enrollment of these students have grown in the higher education sector, the financial support in various forms doesn't seem to have grown at the same rate. And of course, then there are issues of how effectively uh, they are being used, the issues of corruption, their impact, accountability, etc., etc. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are additional resources required with this widening base or not? Infrastructure support, as you all know, is not just adequate, but it is poor, it is lacking. And the problem is not just about creating enabling infrastructure. More important than that is, how are we going to maintain once it is created? So we don't want to go back to that same experience of ours where girls' toilets are opened, but they are kept locked. Uh, so that's again going to be a very great challenge. Protection and personal support. So now today we are talking about creating inclusive campus culture. We are talking about building sensitivities which have been lacking so far. So sensitization, training, and institutionalization of this whole effort is going to be a major challenge which we are going to face in the coming years. Why I'm saying so? If you just look at these figures, this is a very interesting table. Now, these are some of the select areas which I'm trying to show here. If you look, U stands for universities, C stands for colleges, and O stands for other institutions. Look at the connectivity, just very close to 50%, not even a quarter. Campus, is the campus friendly? Do they have a grievance redressal mechanism? Is there a vigilance cell, equal opportunity cell, separate toilet for disabled female? Now, look at all of these are some very, very important requirements for improving inclusion and equity. I'm sure all of you are going to agree with me on that. We have talked about 4 various dimensions to it, including the sexual harassment anti-ragging cell is the only one which exists in about 70% and above in all the 3 categories. Counselors for students, 80% of the universities was very much lacking in the other 2 categories. Skill development centers, self-defense class for women. Look at this, pathetic. Now, aren't these things extremely important in the light of the inclusive culture and the inclusive climate that we are talking about today? It's not just about some brick and mortar infrastructure that we have to create in order to make our campuses inclusive. How are we going to make our campuses more friendly for more comfortable for these kind of students requires much more to be done beyond this. So these are the major areas which have already been identified by the government, of course, with a lot of consultation that has happened for implementing the new education policy. And I have brought to the table the ones which are directly meant for improving the equity and inclusion in the higher education sector. So we can divide them again because we started with this kind of a classification in the very beginning. The ones which will help in improving access and participation. So we are talking about setting clear targets for higher GERs, for SEDTs. Very important. So far, we have had targets for increasing gross enrollment ratio in higher education from 27.5 to 50% by 2030. This is a composite figure for everyone. But now we are saying that we need to set clear targets for each and every group and category of students. The second one is enhanced gender balance in admissions in higher education institutions. So as I showed to you, there are certain disciplines, there are certain category of institutions where still women are very, very less in number as compared to men. And therefore, we need to identify further these areas and see that the gender is more balanced, gender representation is more balanced. Establishing more high quality higher education institutions in aspirational districts and special education zones containing large number of SCDGs. Already one has been very recently announced in Ladakh, one of the difficult northeastern regions which was deprived of a higher education. A central university has been announced to be opened there very recently. But more important than this, the last point which says make admissions process more inclusive. Now it is here that whole issue of making the functionaries more sensitive to the needs of this community comes in picture. So this is extremely important and challenging. The second area, which is about ensuring survival or retention and continuity, maintaining the continuity of the students in the higher education sector. Here we are talking about, of course, increasing more financial assistance and scholarships, both in the public and private, mitigate the opportunity costs and fees for pursuing higher education. I did talk about very briefly refer to that sometimes they have to drop out of schools and colleges in order to earn livelihoods, etc. So they certainly have a higher opportunity cost of being in the system than the other category, the general category. Conduct outreach programs on higher education opportunities and scholarships amongst SCDGs. Now, we also find there is a very, very high degree of lack of awareness regarding the options and opportunities that already exist. So how can we begin with any kind of outreach programs? Next is ensure all buildings and facilities are wheelchair accessible and disability. I'm not talking this on my own. This is something which the government has already identified. Now it is not just wheelchair and disability. The disability factor is much, much wider than this, and we need to create many more equipments in order to make our higher education institutions disabled friendly. When it comes to development, that is improving learning outcomes, etc., these are the areas which have been identified already. Develop and support high quality higher education institutions that teach in local Indian language or bilingually. So language, as I pointed out in my very few earlier slides, is again something which has not been talked about in the policies so far, is being emphasized this time. And therefore, from here, when we are talking about teaching in local languages, we are also going to need a lot of books, reading material in local and regional languages, which is where our role becomes all the more important. How are we going to uh, be able to contribute towards this? Develop and support technology tools for better participation and learning outcomes, develop bridge courses, etc. All of this the government has already identified. In terms of protection, both from physical and mental abuse, the government has already highlighted ensure sensitization of faculty, counselors, students on gender identity issues, etc., etc. And they are wanting these to get highlighted not just in curricula but by way of very informal and small means, like putting posters, etc., in the colleges, maybe through playway means, through non-academic activities like street shows, this, that, all those kinds of ways in which we can build in the sensitivities of the people, and strictly enforce any kind of discrimination or anti-harassment rules in the campuses. This is something which has been talked and identified as an implementation plan by the government already. But the first line that they put is earmark suitable government funds for the education of SCDs. Now, this in itself is one of the biggest challenge. Earmark suitable government funds. Now, if earmarking suitable government funds, because all of this we will agree is a function of adequate finance. Nothing happens without money. How then we are going to, and we all know that funds are always limited. Now, this is something which I bring in at the table for you people to add on from here. I feel that there are still certain areas which need uh, additional um, additional what should I say? Not just coverage. We need to take care of these areas additionally. What are those? We need to expand the coverage of SEDGs. The very definition of SEDGs needs to be expanded further to include, let us say, uh, more the doubly disadvantaged women, women who are widowed, women who are divorced, women who are single, even single girl child, uh, women or people in the of the socio-economically backward classes coming from rural interiors, gifted children, and children with special talents. So we need to expand our facilities, be it by way of scholarship, be it by means any other means, to these category of people also. We also need to expand the scope and coverage of the financial support. So right from direct cash transfers, scholarships, freebies, etc., uh, we need to also indulge into promotional activities, let us say by providing for laptops or maybe good electronic gadgets which may help them to be able to access tech-enabled teaching learning facilities, etc. Um, this also needs to be looked into, because all of us have seen how the students from these groups have struggled to uh, be able to participate in the teaching learning process all through the pandemic. So how we can make that available to them? Institutionalizing multidisciplinarity, integrated vocational and skill development opportunities equitably. Now we certainly talk about skill development being an integral part of the higher education system. But we are also talking about strengthening the industry academia linkages, how the industry can play a more defined and active role in developing the employability skills of our students. But have we ever thought of the angle of inclusion in any of these activities? So far, we haven't. What happens is, whenever there is a campus selection drive happening, or maybe whenever there are any such kind of interactions that are happening, you would find that these students may either avoid coming, or they may be sitting in the corners without any kind of an interaction happening. So the learning doesn't take place. Many of the times the internship opportunities that come across are taken away by the brighter students from elite socioeconomic groups, and lesser reach to these students. So how are we going to make all of this also more inclusive is something which has been missing in the policy, and we can always do it even at the institutional level. The third element which I find is also important, and we need to take care of it, is mental health, well-being, safety, and security measures. Not just through counseling and mentoring, but also how the other side of the community. So it's by civic learning, like how we make everyone be able to respect every other person's individuality and identity. This becomes a big challenge. Mental health and physical well-being both have emerged very, very strongly in the pandemic. And we all know that both mentally and economically and physically, it is the students from this community who have faced greater trouble and struggled in comparison to the other groups. So how we can ensure that their mental well-being is also something that we can think about. Access to teaching learning materials. Now, when we are talking about bilingual teaching or teaching in regional languages, when we are talking about integrating technology into the teaching learning process and online teaching material, are all the assistive teaching material. We are talking about bringing in students from the Divyang group, so that the disabled group. So assistive teaching learning material. These are some of the things that we need to take care of. And needless to say, that all of this entails huge, huge financial implications. Huge. So then what do we do? So way forward, and this is something I think this is going to be my last slide. So the way forward then is that we adopt a target target-oriented earmarked funding approach. Target-oriented, and this requires a lot of research, a lot of good quality database to be able to at least target what exactly, how many are there. Uh, this is something which is absolutely absent today. Mm, Earmarked funding approach is extremely important because funds, of course, are all the time limited. So we may like to adopt a 3-point formula by focusing on the more vulnerable groups, more vulnerable regions, and more vulnerable facilities. Now, these certainly are going to be different. They will vary from region to region. They will vary from state to state. And it is here that the role of the state becomes extremely important in order to be able to identify these space specific requirements. And I would then recommend for creating at least 5 types of special funds, these being uh, horizontal equalization funds. So, in order to reduce the inter-district disparities within the states, we may even go down below the district levels. It all depends upon the capacity and capability of the states to do so. But yes, we need to prioritize investments in a more decentralized fashion in the special education zones. The second kind of funds which I would like to be earmarked are special inclusion funds. Now, you all must be aware that uh, we have already started with gender budgeting as a mandatory exercise at the central as well as the state levels. Gujarat itself being one of the pioneer states in gender budgeting and also child budgeting. Both in gender budgeting and child budgeting, education is a very uh, important component. But then, other than these two groups, we can have special inclusion funds for the doubly disadvantaged, for those uh, gifted children, for the Divyang. We may talk about social inclusion funds. So, special inclusion funds of various categories can be talked about. Gender budgeting or child budgeting is not the only way of looking at it. The third kind of funds that we may like to earmark are diversity support system development funds. So these funds can be earmarked for creation of both infrastructure, both the brick and mortar infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure in the campuses. The training and career support funds, you all would agree the kind of sensitization that we are talking about today, the kind of actual training also which would be required for the faculty and for the administration to be able to handle such huge 3000 plus students from diverse communities is not going to be easy. So training and career support funds, career support certainly for the students, like kind of employability skill training programs, the trainings in English communication, English language, communication skills, computer skills, some basic help that can be arranged for on the campuses itself. Very often we find that the students are forced to look for these kind of trainings outside the college campuses and university campuses, which are certainly very highly priced and outside the reach of the students from this group. Therefore, what kind of facilities can be made available for this particular group on campus itself? So career support funds to them. Technology integration funds. Technology, we all know the policy also has laid a lot of emphasis on that, how we can integrate technology to the benefit of the SED. Integrating technology in a general fashion is something different, but integrating technology to the to cater to the needs of the SED. So technology integration funds. And lastly, but not the least, the performance-based incentivization funds. So let me share with you that the 15th Finance Commission uh, has already recommended in the education sector, but this recommendation has been made at the state level. So the states, based on their performance, so better performing states can actually seek additional finances by way of incentivization funds from the central pool of resources available for the education sector. How are we going to map their performance? There's already a list of indicators that have been declared to map the performance of the states. A similar kind of an exercise can be done at the sub-state level, but more importantly, we can look at performance of these regions in terms of equity and inclusion. So bringing in some more indicators of equity and inclusion to see how the districts or at the sub-district level, the regions are performing in terms of improving the equity and inclusion in the higher education sector. And lastly, needless to say that the policy has already recognized the need for a collective action in this regard, both at the systems level and at the institutional level. There is a need to strengthen our database. There is a need to do more research in the area. There is a need to create additional and innovative funds for the purpose. But very, very important, there is a need to promote the contribution and active involvement of other stakeholders other than the government. We cannot just keep keep looking up to the state machinery to be able to provide for all of this. And therefore, ways and means to bring in the industry or the CSO and also the international organizations in doing their little bit in promoting inclusion, equity in the higher education sector becomes extremely important. So on that front, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention to all the talking that I have been doing from
Thank
the
you very
past.
much. Thank you very much, Professor Mona Khare. It has been very wonderful presentation. I congratulate you. It has been very informative, very analytical, and very suggestive.
Thank you.
On
Very
the
much.
all on the 3 points, very informative. We have gone into very deep unearthing the data relevant to explain the issues of equity and inclusive education in India. And you have very ably analyzed all the data to the present context of the challenges of equity and inclusive education in different dimensions. Many dimensions were less known, and many dimensions are very less researched also. And your talk also at every stage has been very suggestive of the actions that need to be taken. Often academicians talk of academics and nothing suggestion type of thing comes out of that, but your talk has been also very suggestive what the government should do, and towards the later part of your presentation, and what the institutions should do to achieve exclusive education and achieve equity in education in general and higher education in particular, and how exactly the financing, because financing is the crux, how exactly the financing will be required, and where the government has often been failing to perform its duty appropriately, I should say. Now is the time. I will take some 10-15 minutes or so. Should I take right now, or I can open it for some observation? Many people are must be looking to appreciate your talk and point out certain points of that, and then you may like to reflect on that. A few observations.
I think we would welcome your observations. So
okay,
yes.
okay.
Because
so
that we have caught you, we might as well make use your knowledge.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry to
Thank you.
sir,
It has been a great pleasure. Yeah.
Sir, may I request all the participants to switch on their camera for 1 minute? We just want to take one pic. All the participants, please put on your camera just for 1 minute.
I think this is for documentation purposes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. We also need to record. I am sure you are also recording the whole thing.
No
I
problem.
could see the recording also on, so people are taking some time to.
Yeah, they are taking time. Yeah. Okay, we should not waste time. I think so. So you may start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This talk has been very revealing indeed, and I'm personally very much benefited by this talk of Professor Mona Khare on so many issues which are very intrinsic to the problem of equity and inclusive higher education, and the implicit factors which are less known and less discussed and looked upon from that angle that Professor Mona Khare has done. So it has been really very good and appropriate, timely talk, I should say, and discussion, and also prescription for government and for higher education institutions. Because in higher education, when we talk of higher education or any level of education, the three dimensions are very important. One is the quantity or the number. We are a huge system of higher education in India, as going by the data which is given by All India Survey of Higher Education. We have something like 1,043 universities, more than 1,000 universities, more than 42,000 colleges, 3.85 crore students, close to crore students. Very few countries of the world do have a larger population than the enrollment in higher education in India, and something like 15 lakh teachers. So in such a big system of higher education, it's really very difficult to maintain and ensure equity and inclusive higher education. If it is a small system of higher education, a small system of education, it's very easy to maintain quality and inclusive character also. But if it is a very huge system, and we are moving to make it still larger, because the enrollment ratio is still around 27%, and if in future enrollment ratio goes to 30% or 35-40%, and the number increases, and also the phasing out of the smaller institutions and bigger institutions coming in for reasons very well explained by Professor Mona Khare, then the challenge for quality will be much more difficult, much more problematic, maintaining the quality. If the number is small, maintenance of quality is easy. If the number increases, maintenance of quality. So there is a trade-off, triangular issues, quantity, quality, and equality, inclusive character of higher education. So the larger system we have, it becomes still difficult to maintain quality. And again, it becomes difficult to maintain equity and to have an inclusive system of higher education. There is a trade-off. The larger the number, the more difficult to maintain quality and more challenging to ensure equity from every consideration, and to make the system, such a big system, inclusive at the same time. So it's really challenging, and it has been a very good presentation, or inclusive, I should say. The talk was all inclusive and equity in inclusiveness and equity in higher education. It was all inclusive talk given by Professor Mona Khare. You very rightly mentioned about the goal number 4 of the Sustainable Development Goal, about the inclusive education and lifelong quality education, lifelong opportunity of learning. If we look to the first 3 goals of the Millennium Development Goals, then again we find that the real focus is on this issue: eradicate extreme poverty and hunger from the world, achieve universal primary education, and promote gender equality. So the first 3 of the Millennium Development Goals, the underpinning in that is again to ensure equity and inclusive system of the economy and the society, and that also takes us to achieve these in education system. And the next 3 about the health: reduce infant mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other killer diseases, because because education comes next to health and ensuring health. And the poor health of the downtrodden and the deprived sections of the population is one of the reasons why their income is less to be spent on education, and larger part of their income is spent on hospitalization or sickness or one or other member of the family, and that NSS data supports this. And the last two of the Millennium Development Goals also indirectly point to this issue. Ensure environmental sustainability. Now, if droughts come, floods come, epidemics come, disasters come, then they affect the poorer sections of the population first, then the well-to-do sections of the population. So there again, because these exigencies are more affecting the poorer sections of the population, poorer households and their wards, their children. So in the next period, when they send their ward to a school or to higher education, the impact of that is very gigantic, and that is why they are underprivileged to receive the quality higher education that they need to have. Another important thing which needs to be mentioned is that while we are discussing these issues, the emotional attachment, which was also mentioned by Professor Mona Khare, and the provision of supporting the children who are coming from the poorer sections of the society, and the quality, ensuring quality education and ensuring availability and access to quality institutions for the downtrodden. There are two reports. One is this report, which is the National Education Policy 2020, and previous to that, there was another document which was released the previous year in 2019. Here the phrase is unrepresented groups. Here the phrase is unrepresented groups, and here the phrase is socially and economically deprived sections of population, to address the same group which need our special attention in making them able to receive good education, have access to good education and quality education. And the ways in which the government should be acting in future will be very important, and we'll see for India to have a system of education, which the very first sentence of this report, 2020 report, the very first sentence of this report says that education is fundamental. Otherwise, we find that inclusive and equity education is one of the points in discussion in the whole report, but the very first sentence points to this. Education is fundamental. Education is fundamental to realize the full potential of the human individual, to realize the full potential of the human being. It is fundamental to create equitable and just society, and it is fundamental to promote national development. So three things. The first sentence focuses on that education is fundamental to realize and to achieve the full potential of the human individual. And the more difficult issue is how to achieve the full potential and the hidden qualities, innate abilities of the deprived sections of population, of the children coming from that section of population. Second phrase, to create equitable and just society. Equitable and just society, we cannot have that equitable and just society without taking care of the equitable and inclusive education system. And thirdly, to promote national development, because national development comprises the development of all sections of the population, educational development, economic, and because education holds the key for development of social dimension, economic dimension, technological dimension, all. So quality, when we think of quality, many dimensions of that has been very well explained. Another clue that comes from the discussion of quality is from the determinants of the quality. Because quality is something which has four very important determinants. Number one is the student and the background of the student, the innate abilities of the student, the emotional health of the student, the physical and mental capabilities of the student, the economic and social background of the student, the cultural and demographic background of the lingual background of the student. Language is important, and you have very ably mentioned and covered that part. I think that as we move ahead in the ladder of education from primary to secondary, higher secondary, graduate to postgraduate, every subject becomes its own language. For instance, if I, as a student of economics, sitting in the class of economics, then economics has its own language. Physics has its own language. their English or Hindi becomes less important. Every subject becomes a language. So a student must be conversant with the subject, then the language becomes secondary at higher level and specialized level of education. Because if mathematics is being taught, whether it is in Hindi or English or Urdu, in whatever language, if I don't know mathematics, then I will not be able to understand mathematics. So every language becomes, every subject becomes a language. That point also needs to be kept in mind. And there it is important that if the grip of the student is strong in native language in the beginning of education, then certainly it will be very useful when the subject is developed at higher stages, when the subject itself becomes the language. So one is a student, the second is teacher, how to sensitize the teacher to be aware of the need for equitous and inclusive higher education, sympathies and concern and mentoring, counseling, everything very ably explained by Professor Monak. The third, facilities. And in present times, the technology and the blend of the face-to-face and the technology facilities, and also poorer group-friendly, disabled and physically challenged group-friendly facilities, and fourthly, the management or use of the facilities, how they are utilized and managed in the educational institutions, the governance and the administration of the education system to ensure that the facilities are used to the fullest extent to give benefit to all the participants in higher education, all students, and especially those who do not have facilities at home. So many things are important, and all those things have been very ably discussed by Professor Mona Khare. I congratulate you as chairperson of this talk with all my heart for this wonderful presentation. We stand to gain in many ways. Will there be some discussion, Professor Hansa Jain ma'am, Director ma'am?
Yes, sir. I think we will we do have some time.
Yes.
20
So we
to
can open it. We can open it if there are some observations on the talk and learned participants who have attended this program are there with us if they like to reflect on this talk. Thank you very much.
Sir, there are few questions in the chat box. We can take those also, and if other people want to ask some questions, they are also invited. So, sir, shall I start with the chat box? There are 2 or 3 questions.
We can.
Okay. There is one question by Dr. Vachaspati Chukla. NSSO-based evidence suggests that rural-urban disparity is quite large in India. Other 2 aspects of disparity, gender and social group, is observed only in rural sector, not in urban sector. However, the policy on disparity is focused on gender and social group aspects of disparity. Then how we are going to bridge rural-urban disparity? This is one question.
Professor Mona Khare, would you like to reflect on that?
Okay, all right. I would maybe add something. I have already talked about this in my session. Like, yes, so far the focus was more on social group disparities and more on gender disparities. With the thing that we have specifically started with gender budgeting also. Um, but rural urban disparities have been very stark in the country, no doubt about it. But if you go by the figures today, more than 60% of the government colleges are in the rural sector of the country. But does that ensure that all the uh, uh, population in the eligible group also has access to these colleges is something which we further need to look into. Uh, as far as the ways in which these are getting tackled is, you already know that aspirational districts are now being identified. The areas and districts and regions where the college densities are poor, or which are small colleges, So all kinds of problems do exist, and there is an effort to identify these issues, more particularly in the rural regions. But what I am more worried about is, it is not just making a college available in the rural sector. It is to what Professor Muzammil sir was referring. It is also about ensuring that the college at least meets certain standards of teaching and quality. So you may just open a college in a remote region of the country, but what if no teachers are available or willing to go there? What if we are not able to uh, create the required kind of an infrastructure in these colleges? What if we are not able to provide any kind of transport facilities, matching services and facilities of the nature? I'm not saying that they will become at par with the colleges that are operating in the urban areas, but there is an effort to open colleges in the rural hinterlands of the country. But what is more important is to maintain the quality and standards in these colleges, in
Yes.
my view.
Yes, yes, yes. And because the standard of living and deprivation is much more backward in rural areas, and that needs to be addressed, and therefore this inequality in education is also more stark in the rural areas than in the urban areas.
Absolutely.
That is very important. So first, the overall situation needs to be addressed, and that is why we say that during the liberalization over the last 30 years, the development has gone up, but the fruits of development have not been equally shared. And same is the case with education also.
And the incentivization
Yeah.
fund
Ah,
of
that's
the
right.
government
Yeah.
in the 15th Finance
Yeah.
Commission is actually referring to some of these things only, like
Yeah.
how the inter-regional disparities. Obviously, they are only talking about horizontal equalization across
Yeah.
states. But
Yeah.
as I mentioned, this can be taken down to inter-district and maybe further sub-regional levels at the state, within the state itself, to see how we can tackle this issue of rural-urban disparity.
Yeah.
So
Any
with your
other
perm-
question, observation?
Yeah,
so
Professor
with your,
Niti.
so with your permission of the chairman, can I make an observation, sir?
Please, please.
Yeah, I think at the outset, I want to really congratulate Professor Khare for a very comprehensive and a presentation which covered a wide canvas of issues. And I think at the end of the last slide, I think was the most was a pointer on how do we go about it, because we are all very adept at suggesting pathways, but when we come down to operationalizing, I think we always take a backseat. So I think to that extent, ma'am, it was really
Thank you so much.
very comprehensive. But there are
Very true.
just two issues that I would like to raise. The policy is very heavy on multidisciplinarity. It talks about making multidisciplinary campuses and having a large number of students and all. At the same time, I don't know how to reconcile with the fact that the current multidisciplinary centers of excellence are taking a backseat in terms of funding, in terms of priorities. For instance, you see the women study centers, the Dalit studies, these kind of institutions are not doing so well. And I think to that extent, the kind of knowledge that we are those institutions were creating, and it's not only social sciences, even scientific institutions like the atmospheric and ocean sciences, those kind of multidisciplinary kind of research institutions are facing a lot of issues and problems in terms of faculty intake, in terms of funding and all. So which will obviously result into the creation of less knowledge, which will ultimately percolate down to higher education as well as to the school in the long run. So that is one thing. How do we reconcile that? And then the renewed emphasis on multidisciplinarity. And the second point that I want to flag is we are, and especially after the pandemic, too much of emphasis on technology. And do you think we are putting the horse before the cart? Because the availability of technology, there is a wide chasm in rural area, classes, social groups, so much of disparity. At the same time, if the education is oriented towards technology and technological skills, ultimately, what kind of future employment outcomes again, the kind of disparity is going to be perpetuated. The economically backward groups and left out groups who have no access to technology, when they are coming into the employment market, they would be at a considerable disadvantage because they are not equipped to take those kind of jobs. So those disparities in any case are going to get perpetuated. And similarly, the condition with the privatization and corporatization of the higher education. How many people can afford these niche and these very affluent universities which are being encouraged? So it is actually down in the middle, perpetuating a lot of disparities already, which is going to be reflected in the employability aspect and in the future labor market outcomes. So what are the thoughts on these issues? That is my only observation, sir.
These are very important issues that you have raised, Professor Niti Mehta, and particularly the beginning with multidisciplinarity. I think we should also look from the other angle. Every single subject is now a multidisciplinary subject, because specializations and sub-specializations within a subject have made it such a big subject that any one single subject may be seen as a multidisciplinary area. For instance, physics, for instance, economics, for instance, any subject. The sub-branches within that subject have taken it so wide. And then if in this situation we want to connect so many other subjects, then it will be a very huge gamut of knowledge that would be willing to cover. I think will be very difficult to assimilate, to understand and to create new thing in that. But then because many of the subjects, they have relationship with the other, and their relationship is coming up in a big way and in a very significant manner. Perhaps it is in that light that this multidisciplinary word has been used by this policy. Otherwise, for me as a student of my subject, it itself has grown as a very, very area and as a multidisciplinary subject. Regarding that, your technology issue, I think this is very important. And now in the job market, another important thing is that if the student coming from disadvantaged group of the society, it takes longer years to complete a good quality education. And again, it takes longer years to wait for opening, because the data and research shows, Geeta Kington and Munazza Aslam, that study shows that students with lesser education get early opening, and students with higher education have to wait longer for good opening. And that is why the investment which has gone into the education of specialized education and technologically advanced education will take more waiting period to have a good opening in the economy. So we should also look this point from that angle also, because the investment will be huge. And the third point that you mentioned, the entry of the private institutions, corporate institutions there, because the government says that public is spirited, that is the real phrase, public is spirited private institutions will be thought for giving support by the government. Now, how to identify public spirited private institutions, public spirited corporate institutions, which will be eligible for government support? And if they are eligible for government support, there will be also support for students coming from the deprived sections of the society, so that they can meet the rising cost of that technically advanced courses, STEM courses, science, engineering, technology, and mathematics, and the state-of-the-art technology courses. Because the moment the student takes admission, things change by the time the third year or the fourth year is reached. In technology, things are, for instance, in animation and design, things are changing so quickly that by the time the course completes, it's a new scenario altogether as compared to when the admission was taken 3 or 4 years back. So things are changing very fast, will be very difficult, not easy. But then the provisions which have been made and the suggestions which have come out from the talk by Professor Mona Khare, concerns will always be there, because there cannot be absolute solution. Concerns will always be there, and concerns will pave way for solutions and a situation conducive for development in future, to take out full potential of the individual, to create an equitable and just society, and promote national development. Thank you. Thank you very much.
May I just briefly add?
Yes, please.
So, yeah, three very, very important aspects that you have brought to fore, Professor Mehta. As far as multidisciplinarity is concerned, I very much relate to the kind of concerns that you have raised. But the whole idea about multidisciplinarity emerged from making our higher education system more liberal, in the sense that it had always been criticized that the social sciences are dying a slow death in the country. We are a very fragile system. We have very watertight compartmentalization, etc., etc. So how to actually encourage liberal arts in the country, and also how to revive social sciences by making it a part of the multidisciplinary education systems. It was realized that by creating very high order centers of excellence, when I'm talking about centers of excellence, I'm not just referring to the centers like what you mentioned, like the Gender Studies Center or the Dalit Studies Center. When I'm just referring to the specialized institutions, the single discipline institutions. Uh, but then these niche, very high order specialized institutions, it was always criticized that the students over here may be very good in the technical aspect of their subjects and disciplines, but they lack a lot of general and social skills. And that was also one of the reasons as to why the very concept of multidisciplinary, large-sized universities and higher education institutions has been borrowed, if I may use that word, from the Western culture. And we have yet to see how this unfolds in our country and how helpful it is going to be. Coming to the technology part, yes, but one thing I have to say, we cannot shy away from technology. Technology has become a way of life, and it is going to enter into our lives more and more in the coming years. With the kind, whether it be the job sector, whether it be the industry sector, or whether it be our day-to-day lives. Today, when we are talking about the industry 4.0, we are moving towards industry 5.0, which is going to be even more technology oriented. We cannot shy away from technology. If we what we have to actually see to is how we are going to make access to technology become a reality for all. This is something, by saying this, that we would not use technology, we are not going to solve the issue. So that's my second mm, um, not answer, but yeah, something that I may like to add to what you have. But yes, all of these are certainly very large challenges that we are facing and we are going to face. I forgot the third
Yes.
aspect if you want me to then answer, but
Privatization, corporatization of the system of
Corporatization.
education. Mhm.
privatization and oh yes, oh yes. I think Professor Muzammil has already answered to that, but yeah, like um, that public spiritedness, I really do not know how we are going to control this
Yes.
whole surge of privatization and commercialization in higher education. But also we have to accept that we cannot simply just keep relying on the state system to take care of such a huge higher education sector that exists in the country. The only thing that we might probably be able to do is how can we incentivize in a very clever fashion, like how can we direct these other stakeholders, as I mentioned in my very last slide, the industry or the the corporate social responsibility norms. they mandate the companies to spend at least 2% of their profits in the area of education or health. But in one of our studies where we were talking to the corporate giants, we found that there is no such policy existing within these large multinational corporations as to how they are going to use these corporate social responsibility funds in the education sector. And all of them said that, oh, we go for plantation drives, or maybe they go to some close by school and they ask, in a very random fashion, they are doing certain activities in the nearby localities. But is there any systematic guidelines as to how these funds can be channelized in the best possible manner, in order to maybe solve many of these problems of quality or equity or any such needs of the higher education sector? Is something which the government can certainly look at. Thank you, sir.
I think we have Professor Dinesh Awasthi who would like to
Okay.
bring some issue.
Yes.
Well, I am an alumni of Sardar Patel Institute. So it is a
Thank you.
privilege to be attending such a beautiful session by Professor Khare. It was quite comprehensive and I am quite impressed by the range of issues which you have covered. I wish you had covered one or two issues more. One is when you talked about this divide. I'm really scared when the policy talks about teaching intensive universities and research intensive
Research
universities.
intensive.
I tell you, this government is committing same blunder. When they created ICSSR, then there will be research institutions and there will be universities. So universities will teach and ICSSR institutions will do research. Neither happened, unfortunately. So this is one thing which I don't know how where will it lead to. I'm really confused about it. Second thing is, ma'am, you beautifully said 5 types of funds, but where are those funds? Now, 55 years back, Kothari Commission in 64, 66, they talked about 6% of GDP as an expenditure on education. The highest which we reached is 3.45 or 3.7. And it is declining, unfortunately. Though the number is increasing, the real numbers, but it is declining as a part of GDP. Talk of central government. Highest was during Manmohan Singh's period, 0.7%. Central government, 0.7%. It has already come down to 0.4%. Now, where are those funds? You are talking about 5 types of funds. I don't see anywhere these funds are there. And the third thing which I would like to raise, third flag, is that this policy does not give any concrete roadmap. It's all very hazy, very, very vague. I mean, if you just go through, when you talk of skills, go through the paper by Santosh Mehrotra was published in EPW. When he visited China and he came back and gave China's impression and how the system works and how you branch up to skills from education and how you enter into higher education from skills is a beautiful model. But here, there is hardly anything which you can really talk about how to do, how to go about it. And one of my colleagues in the university, he says, "Sahib, ye theory mein bahut hai, practice mein kya hai?" He's our vice president, Dr. Manish Shah. He always keeps on saying, "Sahib, ye kaise karenge isko?" Now, what government is doing, they send a circular to the universities and tell, please make a roadmap for yourself without any proper guideline. So to my mind, frankly speaking, it is a good utopian construct which lacks pragmatism. This is all my view is about it. Madam, if you could respond to these 2-3 points, I'll be really grateful. But I must congratulate you for a very, very comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. May I, sir? Professor Muzammil?
Please, briefly, you can, yes, on some of the points.
Okay. So coming to your very first concern, and which is not just yours, but all of us, more importantly, the economists, and Professor Muzammil himself would agree to this. Yes, we are struggling to reach the 6% mark of spending our GDP. And for the first time, this confusion has been cleared, that it is the 6% should come only from the public kitty. Otherwise, there was this kind of a confusion whether it is a total expenditure on education to be just 6% of GDP, both from public and private sources. But this says that it is this public expenditure needs to be a minimum of 6% of the GDP. We are still far away. And let me tell you, the kind of prospects that are emerging post the pandemic, we are not going to meet it in near future anyways. So forget about that. But then, yes, if we want to reach the quality standards internationally, which we are talking about and targeting at, we will require funds. And everywhere across the globe these days, we are talking of collective, like education in itself is now being termed as a global common good. We are not talking about education anymore in terms of being a public good or a private good. We have gone beyond that debate, and we have now accepted that education is a global common good, and it is a collective responsibility of all stakeholders. So if we are wanting to bring in money into the system, anyways, we will have to be looking for innovative ways to incentivize, to promote the contribution from other stakeholders. We cannot keep relying on the government till eternity. We just cannot. The second thing that you said, that yes, there is no roadmap. Yes, there isn't a clear roadmap, but there are only certain directions. If you have gone through that, the SEC document that has come out, like implementation of the implementation plan of NEP 2020, from where I had also brought one slide for discussing today. That has certainly given some pointers to the areas which may be taken on a priority basis by the institutions. But whatever it be, the implementation grounds have to be the institutions themselves. The implementation grounds, the persons who are going to implement it have to be you and me. So our degree of commitment to our students, our degree of commitment not to the government, not to the system, not to the policy. Our degree of commitment to our students itself should be motivating us to take forward the goods of a policy. The policy, as you will know, is only a very, very umbrella kind of a document, which talks about so many things. It talks about idealistic things, but then how are we going to put it into practice is a challenge for the practitioners like us. We only have to do maybe more research to identify these areas, to be able to support the government, to be able to find our own ways, innovative ways. How is it that we do things in our own homes? The same way we have to think of the campuses to be our own homes and then be more innovative. That is what I feel on a personal front. But yes, the challenges are huge, but it has to be a collective responsibility. We have to look beyond government anyways.
Thank you very much.
Sir,
Thank you very much.
Not a question, sir, just a supplementary that 2019-20, for the capability of this bureaucracy is that 4 lakh crore rupees were unspent from the budget and were returned. So this is what our capability is. Whatever was allocated to the education, 4 lakh crore remain unspent.
Unspent.
Sir, in the universities also, the unutilized money and the way, I'm sure many of you would know about it, how as March nears, how the funds which are meant for organizing seminars and workshops are spent in a majority of universities. A lot of project fund goes unutilized, underutilized, poorly utilized. So we also have
Yes.
a lot of things to improve and correct within our system.
Thank you very much, and it was very lively session. Professor Mona Khare.
Can I have
Professor Das would like to.
Das, okay, Professor
yes,
Das.
I'm sorry, I do not want to take much time, and
Please, please.
excellent presentation. I'm absolutely very informative and very widely covered. And I really learned from this. And apart from enjoying the talk itself, I think there is so much to learn from this talk. So I'm very grateful that she made this very excellent presentation. But I have just two sort of quick points. So one is relating to quality, which is one of the because you're talking about higher education and quality is the issue. So as already we have sort of been discussing, so what kind of regulation is there for several private institutions, universities who have made it a kind of a big business, and whereby they are making all forms of sort of efforts to include people on the basis of whoever is willing to pay a certain amount. If you have more money, so you are willing to come in. So with that, so like the intake is based on how rich you are, and so it's a big business impact. And we know of cases where multidisciplinarity within the university has been introduced so that more students can come in with all kinds of like including I don't know, Garba dance and so many sort of new things have been in the name of multidisciplinarity. You bring in everything, and would not know who are these teachers, how qualified they are. So that is my first question. What is the regulation for? Is there a regulation in this policy to stop this? That's my first question. That also ensures that the poor or the remote guy is not able to join in an institution of higher learning. The second thing relates to how prepared the teacher is. Meaning, like we are talking of technological change, we are talking of new curriculum globally, we are linking, but are our teachers sort of getting away from, and they're still stuck in old books, sort of old ways of teaching. Their notes have yellowed, and so they're the ones who are going to and they are not. We are talking only about the students. We are talking about how to enhance the enrollment. But what about the teacher? The teacher might be the biggest stumbling block to achieving quality, which is of a global standard. So those are two questions about quality. The third thing, which I think for various reasons you have not mentioned and no one is trying to mention, is what about the politics on the campus? That violence, not just politics. Let me use the word violence on campus, which happened all around your institute, which happened in Hyderabad, which happened in Aligarh, Jamia Millia, in JNU. So these are all institutions of higher learning. We are talking about inclusivity. We are talking of all kinds of things. Is there a mention of this in the new education policy? That's what I would like to know. So what is the roadmap for this intolerance, which has been allowed to grow, and we said nothing about that in a presentation on new education policy? Thank you very much.
Professor Mona Khare, very briefly, please.
Yes. So as far as the this whole concern about the violence, campus violence, etc. Yes, the policy, that is the reason as to why the policy is talking about bringing in value education, etc. The integration of generic skills the compulsory mandate for including arts and craft, local arts and craft exposure to our own local culture, etc. So that other than just reading and writing and maybe just learning a particular subject, we are also able to inculcate the value systems in the students. We are able to become more tolerant. We are able to become more respectful towards our own rich culture, and we are able to value it. How far we will be able to achieve it is a different question altogether. But yes, the policy does recognize the dire importance of great emphasis to be given on value education and liberal arts, and that's also one of the reasons as to why liberal arts and social science, revival of social sciences has been a concern in the new policy. Then I think, I'm sorry, the first part of your
yes, the first part was
question,
very important, Professor Das. He talked about that corporate organizations and the question of high cost of fee. And in fact, the fee has lost its meaning, its definition.
Okay, yeah, he was asking about if, he was asking if there is any such regulation. The policy
regulation,
is not talking about. Yeah,
many state governments have brought about. Uttar Pradesh state government has brought about. Many state governments have brought out legislation.
Have brought out, private universities regulation.
Regulation.
Private university regulation.
And the concern is very
genuine,
much correct.
Very genuine. Yeah.
Very because fee is now fee has lost its the meaning of its definition. It should be redefined. All dictionaries will define fee as a token payment or as an indicative charge, which is realized from the beneficiaries of education or any service for that matter, in order that service is provided uniformly and adequately to the eligible recipients and to the legitimate recipients. Now, fee is being viewed as a technique of financing the entire cost of education, also possibly to generate some profit over it. So the regulations are trying to regulate that, but it is still to be seen to what extent those regulations will be able to do something worthwhile on the concerns raised by Professor Das. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Professor Mona Khare, thanks so much, and Professor Das, all the learned participants, and it's over to the director and Professor Hansa Mehta. Hansa Jain, please.
I think it was a very enriching webinar. The presentations were extremely knowledgeable and the speaker. Learned a lot from the presentation, the kind of challenges which were identified and thrown. I think that has set into motion a lot of thinking process on identifying the correct roadmap actually of this. I would consider this webinar to be extremely successful, and I'm really grateful to Professor Khare and to Professor Muzammil to agreeing to chair this session and spare your time and being with us. And we have really it has been a very enlightening experience. I would now, and also to all the participants, Professor Avasthi, Professor Das, for being here and being part of the deliberations. I would now ask Hansa to give a formal vote of thanks, and then we would conclude the session. Thank you so much.
So now I propose vote of thanks. On behalf of SPIESR, first of all, I congratulate Professor Khare for excellent presentation. Starting from the historical overview of discrimination and reservation in higher education system, and also various dimensions of inclusion, you have delved into the equity and inclusivity measures adopted in NEP 2020. With the help of database, you have elaborated the intergroup gender disparity across the social groups and intersectoral and special group disparity. Pointing out the gaps in the existing ways and means, you have suggested 3-point formula, which directly targets for attaining the goal of inclusion and equity in higher education. Ma'am, we are highly enriched with your knowledge and about the subject. Hope that all the participants have learned and enjoyed. Thank you very much, ma'am, for sparing time and giving such an informative deliberation very comprehensively. We are also grateful to Professor Muzammil for presiding over this
Thank
event and handling all the responsibilities of the program very skillfully and giving insightful remarks. We are also delighted by the presence of Professor Avasthi and Professor Keshav Das. I am grateful to all the participants who have become the part of today's webinar from different states. I extend my thanks to all. It was pleasure to have all of you with us. Now I conclude this webinar. And
thank you very much.
thank you all
Thank
for
you very much.
attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you for inviting
Thank
me.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
It was really a great talk, I must say. So,
Thank you, ma'am.
so
Thank you.
बहुत ही अच्छा।
Completely honored and humbled. Thank you so much.
And we will look forward for such an opportunity in future also.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Professor Mehta. Thank you, Dr.
It was a
Hansha.
pleasure, and we are grateful that you accepted our offer without any, hitch.
Always a great pleasure to be connected with colleagues. Look forward to.
Yeah, we are all part of the higher education system, but we never really gave a much structured thoughts to the issues which are confronting it. We are also involved in our own areas of research. So
True,
I think
true.
to that extent, we have been really benefited. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah,
Bless
bye.
everyone.